Dr. Vagesh Pawaiya. Dr. Vagesh Pawaiya teaches at Lady Shri Ram College, University of Delhi in the Department of Political Science. Trained in the legal field, Dr. Pawaiya did his BA LLB honors from National Law Institute, University, Bhopal. And after that, Dr. Pawaiya was trained at Center for Political Studies, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, where he did his master's, MPhil, and PhD. So his his MPhil dissertation and PhD dissertation engages with the concept of emancipation. I would quickly read his dissertation title. His MPhil dissertation was on modern and postmodern understanding of Dalit emancipation, a theoretical exploration. And Dr. Pawaiya pursued this line of thinking, and his doctoral thesis was on race and caste, a comparative study of the idea of emancipation in the Afro-Asian thought and Dalit discourses in India, under the supervision of Professor Gopal Guru. Dr. Pawaiya is extremely well published and have contributed numerous scholarly articles in various spaces, most prominently in Academic Views and Reviews, in International Education, Research and Development Journal, and he has presented his work at many national and international fora. So this doesn't do justice with the kind of work that Dr. Pawaiya has been doing, but we tried to be as brief in our introduction. And today he shall be delivering his lecture titled Contrasting Conception of Race and Caste, Ambedkar and Afro-American Thought. So on that note, on behalf of Department of Political Science, I would like to extend our warmest gratitude for agreeing to deliver this lecture on a short notice. And Dr. Pawaiya, the format is that the lecture would be for 45 minutes. You could be bilingual. It'll be nice if you could be bilingual, or you can choose to speak in English and explain the concepts in Hindi. And post your lecture, we would be opening the floor for question and answers, which would go on for about 30 minutes. So let's say till 5:30. So with that, thank you once again, and the floor is yours. Thank you, Dr. Pawaiya.
Thank you, Dr. Priyanka, for inviting me for this lecture and giving me an opportunity to present my views in front of one of the premier universities of India, BHU. And I'm also thankful to Department of Political Science of BHU for giving me this opportunity. The title of the paper or lecture is Understanding Specifically the Contrasting Conceptions of Race and Caste in India and Ambedkar's and Afro-American Thought. Now, one thing which we start, like, first thing which I want to point it out, like, is the comparisons is possible, The first thing arises, like, in today's time when we are living, we have seen that there much development has taken place in terms of theories, in terms of philosophies. And we have seen that there is a new theory or a new concept of thinking which has emerged, which is a post-colonial studies. I'm aware, like, many of us are aware of that ideas. And the post-colonial studies, if we look at clearly, they're clearly pointing out one thing is that when we do a comparison between ideas, thoughts, thinkers, civilizations, and cultures, we need to be very cautious. And why we need to be cautious, one of the reasons is that because sometimes it happens like those concepts and categories may be not indigenously built up. It means, like, it is not coming from the local vantage point. The same excuse was given when the discourses of Orientalism and colonialism is discussed in India. So a lot of people have argued, like, we need to develop our own categories, our own concepts, our own ideas, our own theories, and why we should borrow the Western ideas, despite of knowing this fact that we have our own sets of ideas. So therefore, when we look at like this comparison and contrasting, is itself becomes a problematic exercise. So is it justiciable that whether we should compare Ambedkar with Afro-American thought, or we should compare race with caste, considering the fact that race and the caste, they are two different sets of categories. One is understood, race is to be understood as a Western concept, whereas the caste is much more an Indian concept, Indian category. Now, I will not take that position. One thing is that why we should not take that position, there are many reasons behind it. While in the lectures we will come up with those reasons. The first thing is that we always heard this word that apples and oranges cannot be compared. And why they should not be compared, one of the reasons is that because they both have a different taste, But if you look at the species or the genus of both apples and oranges, they are fundamentally fruits, We are not comparing a lion with an apple because they are a different genus. Similarly, one can apply the same logic towards the ideas and thoughts, cultures and civilizations, because the ideas and thoughts, the cultures and civilizations, the concepts and categories, they all are humanly constructed, And if they are humanly constructed, then there's a possibility that we can start with this process of comparisons. Clear? Many people give this argument like, if we have a concept of dharma, can dharma be a concept, can be compared with the concept of duty of the Western world? Because in the Western world, if you look at, the duty is considered to be a more secular. It is more considered to be something which is based on a law, something which is based on a constitution. So, क्या ये ठीक है कि हम धर्म को कंपेयर कर सकें ड्यूटी से? क्योंकि अगर धर्म को हम देखेंगे और धर्मा को हम देखेंगे तो धर्मा एज अ मल्टीपल डायमेंशंस, वो रिलीजियस भी हो सकता है, वो कल्चरल भी हो सकता है, इट कैन बी सोशियोलॉजिकल, इट कैन बी इकोनॉमिक, एंड देयरफॉर इट कैन नॉट बी जस्ट रिड्यूस्ड टू अ कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ ड्यूटी, because ultimately it is a local category. Happen actually, if we do not do this comparisons, if we do not do this contrasting of civilization cultures, we're ultimately going to end up in a politics which might be based on getting back to the original inhabitants, ki original hum the, ye nahi the. We can get back to the notions of purity, that this is the pure race, this is the pure caste, this is the pure ethnicity, or we can get to the reviving of ancient culture, golden age, and therefore our politics may be oriented to that kind of an argument, and therefore it can be lead to a revivalism, which I think to an extent might be a problematic, because we have seen, like, if you look at Indian cultures and society and civilizations, it has actually developed its own multiplicities, it's developed its own diversity and plurality, which cannot be negated, which is well reflected in our Indian constitution as well. Clear? So in that sense, if this is a methodological vantage point, why comparisons are important and we should have that approach, we are almost going to have three options available to us, if we don't take a comparative approach. The first would be call it like, we can completely reject the Western ideas, or we can completely accept the Western ideas. Both of the position might be a very, very difficult position to digest. Clear? But the third position, which I mentioned, is a comparative position. And why this comparative position is a better option? Because when we compare the things, we can do a systematic study. We can either systematically reject few things, or we can systematically accept few things. And when we get into this process becomes very important. Why? Because when we are entering in this process of comparisons, we become more informed. At the same point of a time, when we become more informed, automatically we become a little bit of critical as well. And when we become critical, we can also become dialogical. And when these three sets, information, informed, critical, and dialogical, come into the picture, we can say that we become more and more wiser, And that is what one of the important need in any kind of a society. If we are looking for a democracy, we need our demos should be like that kind of a people. If our demos do not follow this kind of an approach, there are chances that we tend to become more and more ideological, but without any substance. Clear? So therefore, I will now start start with this idea that comparisons are very important in nature. Clear? Now, if we look at the concept of race and caste in India, we need to understand that we have seen like Ambedkar's ideas are mostly remain in the margins. Why it's remain in the margin? One of the reasons which I can find, which many of us has finded us, is that Ambedkar has taken a very, very different approach, which might not be a very, very indigenous approach or a local approach, because to an extent, first thing is that he's a very much strong critique of the Hinduism, and more importantly, the Brahminical Hinduism. Second is that his views are mostly developed in the Western world. He was a student of John Dewey, At the same point of a time, we can also say is that he's also very much influenced by people like Edmund Burke. He was also influenced by Buddhism. And when we see all these sets of ideas, and ultimately we have seen like, he's a very strong liberal as well. Clear? But all these ideas, being a liberal, being a follower of John Dewey, also the follower of Edmund Burke, and also at the same point of a time, believer in a French ideas like liberty, equality, and fraternity, we can clearly say that Ambedkar always lives in the margin. It's an outside figure to an extent, and that is the reason why Ambedkar ideas may not be taken very seriously on the ground on just theory and philosophy, because what is more important in his ideas is the notion of rationality and scientific consciousness, which might be very much problematic for understanding the religion or understanding the myths or understanding the spirituality. Clear. Now, therefore, this makes us need to make this argument that when we look at Orientalist debates in India, specifically the debates of colonialism, we have always tried to say that colonialism is a form of imperialism, because colonizer bahar se aaye, उन्होंने अपने concepts और categories हम पर थोपे और उन्होंने हमारी society को ऐसा बना दिया. They've always wanted to look at India in their own imagination. That is a larger perspective we have, and therefore object क्या है हमारे पास, options हमारे पास ये है कि let's get rid of that colonial categories from us. But we need to make this distinction, and I want to point it out that if we look at the Orientalist debates in India, Orientalism is just not about imperialism. There are two stages of Orientalism in India. The first is called as a romantic phase. And the second is called the Anglican phase. Anglican phase may be a phase which we are criticizing because it's completely a colonial phase, where when we know that Macaulay come over and he says that, Sanskrit is a bad language, it's a dead language, it needs to go away, and therefore he started the English as an education. And that's with how, missionaries came into the power, conversion started, and all those things have started. But that is an Anglican phase. But what about the Romantic phase? The Romantic phase, which is the first phase which taken place in Indian historiography. The Romantic phase was basically started when the company rule was there. It was not taken over by the Queen. When East India Company was there, most of the Indologists came to India. And what they were doing? They were studying Indian culture, civilizations, and more importantly, they were translating most of the Indian scriptures and text. Now the question arises whether their interpretation or their writing of Indian text or their translation is biased. We will say it is not biased, because most of their writings in translation, they have taken the helps of the local people, the local pundits, the local Maulvis. They all were helping them in terms of writing the Indian history. That's why it is called as a Romantic phase. Now, at this Romantic phase, one important thing was that there was an Aryan race. The construction of Aryan race was taking place at this point of a time. If we look at in Indian political history, we find that the Aryan race has not been, the word Aryan itself has not been used very much, unlike in the ancient times, where we see like most of the अगर आप mythologies देखेंगे या text देखेंगे या फिर Indian scriptures देखेंगे या फिर if you look at like most of the epics of India, the word Aryan is very popular. That is considered to be a title which through which each others address each other basically. So when you look at the Aryan race, it was basically constructed in 1784 when the Asiatic Society of Bengal was formed. And who was the people who behind the construction of the Asiatic Society of Bengal? The first person was William Jones. We all know about William Jones. He was the first person. When he come to the India, he says that Sanskrit is a part of Indo-European language. The Sanskrit is considered to be a language because it is a part of Indo-European language. And that's how, if the Europeans are the Aryans, the Indians are definitely Aryans as well. And that's how the Aryan Brotherhood was started in India at this point of a time. The objective was basically to find the ethnic belonging of the natives, that who are the Indians, because we know that the Europeans always use the race lenses to understand the society. So they were looking at what is the race of the Indians, and that's why they come to this conclusion that Aryan is the race of the Indians. Clear? And therefore, people like Thomas Colebrook, Charles Wilkins, they all basically discovered Hinduism at this point of a time, And with this kind of an idea, we have identified that there's one theory which became very popular in 1784 with the Asiatic Society of Bengal, which is basically called the Unity of Origin theory. Unity of Origin theory. And this Unity of Origin theory clearly says that Indian language, including Prakrit, which with not surety we can say that it's the oldest language. Moreover, the Prakrit and the Dravidian language, they themselves are the derivative of Sanskrit language. Because one thing is very clear, they wanted to establish the supremacy of the Sanskrit. Clear? And it's done by the Romantics. Clear? There's a second theory which was developed, which is called Unity of Aborigine theory. Unity of Aborigine theory. which basically started against by the Britishers, but it was started in the Madras, that is St. Ford George College. And in this college, what the Britishers are identified is that the Dravidian language is equivalent to the Munda languages. And therefore, there are no cognates which can define them that they are the part of the Sanskrit. And in fact, they come to this conclusion that Telugu is not a derivative from the Sanskrit. In fact, Telugu has a completely different element which is not the Sanskrit language. Now, and the important person at this point of a time was Francis White Ellis. Francis White Ellis. And he is the person who basically come to this conclusion. Now, this clearly shows that romantic phase of in India, where Britishers were there, they were writing Indian texts. We can see India has now been clearly seen as a two nation divided on the terms of racial lines. One is the Calcutta school, which believes the supremacy of the Sanskrit. The Sanskrit is the original language, and the Dravidians and Prakrit language are the part of it. And second is unity of aborigine theory, which basically says that Dravidian is a separate language, and therefore it's a separate race. So this was the predominant context in which this debate of race was taking place. Now there is an addition comes. The addition comes with the rise of German Romanticism. Now, German Romanticism, if we look at briefly look at what is German Romanticism means actually, and why the Germans, their ideas are romantic in nature specifically. Now, Romanticism in Germany was started at one point of a time when there's one text which was published in Germany, which was written by Tacitus, Tacitus, Tacitus. The text name was Germania, Germania. Now, when this text was published, actually, the text was clearly pointing out that Germans are basically the original, they are the pure race. Therefore, the word Germania means without germs. Clear? And therefore, this is the first thing. And therefore, they were looking for that who are the other people who are pure like us, who are considered to be like pure, Urvolk, we can call it in German, it's called Urvolk, At the same point of a time, another text which was published by Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King Sr., we know that he's considered to be one of the important person who basically break away from the Catholicism in Christianity and introduce the Lutheranism, a Protestantism basically. Now, what Martin Luther did actually, he basically established the German as a holy language. Previously, German was not considered as a holy language. Latin, Greek, they were considered as a Jew or Jews language. They're considered as one can say as the holy languages, and Sanskrit as a holy language. But when he did, German is also a holy language, which clearly pointed out that Germany is basically becoming a new set of people who wanted to looking for their own identity. One of the reasons is that why there is so much of rise of German identity, German pride is taking place. One of the reasons is that because Germany for a long point of a time remained an agricultural society, whereas the most of the Europe has actually become an industrial society. And therefore, Germans was looking for an alternative way to the worldview. They were looking that we do not want it to be understood, or we don't want it to be clubbed as enlightenment people, enlightenment which is associated with science, rationality, analytical ideas, all that kind of a thing. And more about individualism. Germans are looking for an alternative. They looking for history, culture, race, community. These are the categories through which we understand the society. And in that sense, if you look at German Romanticism, mostly looking for unity of poetry, philosophy, and religion. And when we unite unity of poetry, philosophy, and religion are combined together, it automatically means that they are looking for something which is eternal, which is going to remain divine, which is going to remain original. And therefore, the Germans was attracted towards the India. Because in India, they identified that Vedas and Upanishads, they are the texts which talk about divinity, which talk about eternity. And therefore, these are the texts which are very important texts in the modern times. Because Enlightenment has criticized religion, Enlightenment criticized divinity and spirituality. So Vedas and Upanishads are the only text. And that's how the Germans are attracted towards the India specifically. Clear. And it's already been there, British Romantics has already written about the Indian text. So it's very easy for the Germans to pick up those texts and start, understanding the India. Clear. One of the important person is that Max Muller. You must have heard about the name of the Max Muller. Max Muller is considered to be another important person because he was the creator in India, the Aryan race. you know. And when he's creating the notion of the Aryan race in India, he's completely looking at the text of the Vedas. So if you look at like Satpata Brahmana, in fact, he was a translator of the Vedas, but he never come to the India, but he translated the Vedas. And in fact, still now, the Max Muller translation of the Vedas is still considered as an authority, you know. Now, what he said actually, if you look at like, you know, many of you know about it, Gayatri Mantra. So Gayatri Mantra clearly says about it, you know, Bhu, Bhuha, and Swaha, you know, and it clearly says that once the Prajapati, when he heated up the world, it basically with his heat, he produces the earth, atmosphere, and the sky. And the earth, and after heating these things actually, with this heat, there are three jyotis, the three lights which comes into the picture. So from the earth, the Agni came into the picture. From the atmosphere, the Vayu came into the picture. And from the sky, the sun came into the picture. When further heat takes place actually, from the Agni, he said in the Vedas, it's clearly mentioned, from the Agni, the Rig Veda emerges, from the Vayu, the Sam Veda emerges, and from the Vayu, the Yajur Veda emerges, and from the Surya, the Sam Veda emerges, which further divided into three Shukras. And the Shukras are basically that the Bhuva is basically means Brahmin. So Rig Veda belongs to the Brahmins. The Bhuva is basically the Yajur Veda, which belongs to the Kshatriyas. And Soha basically means the Sam Veda, which belong to the, one can say to the Vaishyas. But there is no mentioning of the Shudras. Clear. Now the question arises that Shudras were originally a part of this Aryan system, Aryan race. The answer is that may or may not actually. But according to Max Muller, the Shudras are the Dasayus. You know, the Dasayus are basically the people who does not believe in the Vedas. They are outside the fold. So this was predominant understanding at this point of a time. Clear. And later on, what Max Muller also suggested that when Aryans came over here, you know, one can deny that fact actually, because there's now this dispute also arises whether the Aryans come from outside or they live over here. We can take it that part in the discussion. But when he's talking about the Aryans came to the India, actually, it is a good for the local people. The local people were the Dravidian people, because all these people were speaker of the dialectics, which are Bhil, which are Gond, and ultimately for him, they all belong to the Negro race. So for him, the Negro race need to get assimilated with the Aryan. And that's where the civilizing mission come into the picture. The Aryans have a civilizing mission. Clear. Now, this Aryans have a civilizing mission. This is started by the Romantics. When the Anglicans come to the power, actually, we already mean that Britishers have been criticized on the ground that they have a civilizing mission. But what about the Aryans? The Aryans already have a civilizing mission over here. Clear. And therefore, now this kind of a situation arises. What to do? Should we reject the Romantic phase, which is considered to be a very prideful phase of Indian history, where we have get the Aryan identity. We have been treated as like brothers of the other European world. We are civilized. We have a culture. We have a history. And at the same point of a time, we have the texts which are considered to be the eternal texts, which most of the Europe has lost because they have fallen into the trap of enlightenment, rationality, and science. So India is considered to be a place of like, you know, older wisdom. The question arises, should we reject it? Most of the Indian political thinker did not reject this idea. I will come to that point. Now, the question arises, and therefore it's a very important thing in Indian case. What happens, it becomes like, you know, what Sudipto Kaviraj, the famous Indian political theorist, he says that India now in this situation remain with the question with two options. One is replication. Should we replicate what the Romantics has said or the Anglican has said, or should we improvise? Improvisation basically means like how we should improvise these ideas with our own context. And therefore, most of the time it happens like we have improvised. So if you look at like when Jyotiba Phule was writing the Gulamgiri and his ideas of Ati Shudra and Shudra, he was basically talking about that he's criticizing the Aryan identity, Aryan race, you know. And why he's criticizing it? Because he's clearly pointing out is that Aryans, the Shudras are not the Aryans. In fact, he has used some other set of myths, like Aryans belong to the Shudras belong to the Golden Age. The Golden Age was the pre-Aryan age where they celebrated the Bali. You know, in fact, if you look at in like Maharashtra for a long point of time, the people who are the follower of Phule, they did not celebrate the Dashara, because for them Dashara is basically the time when the Aryan god Aryan people come and destroy the city. Clear. Similarly, at the same point of a time, there are many things like, in fact, like Durga Puja was not celebrated because they thought like a celebration of Durga Puja for the Ati Shudras was basically means that on that day, the wife of Bali basically committed the sati. Clear. So we can say that there's alternative myths, alternative festivals, alternative culture was emerged, in Shudra culture specifically. And why? Because they wanted to deny the Aryan identity. And why? Because they thought that they were the original inhabitants. So we can clearly say that the impact of Romanticism has already gone towards it's impacted the Shudras literature as well, Shudras culture as well. Same point of a time, we cannot deny that Dayanand Saraswati, he's the founder of the Arya Samaj. Now, Dayanand Saraswati has also started the same also banking on the notion of the race, Aryan race, but different from the Phule. So his basically argument is that back to the Vedas basically. And that is the reason why the whole kind of Shuddhis, Shuddhi was performed on the lower caste people so that they can come back to the Aryan fold actually. In fact, if you look at the works of the Dayanand Saraswati, his Arya Samaj is also against the local sects. Just like he's not a believer of, he rejected the Shaivism, he rejected the Buddhism. He rejected the Jainism. In fact, he rejected the Charvakism. Charvakism is considered one of the Lokayata tradition in India, which completely believe in a materialistic philosophies. That has also been rejected. He rejected Sikhism as well. And more importantly, if you look at even he rejected some of the sects, which is very much popular among the lower caste is the Kabirpanthi sect. The Kabirpanthi sect was also rejected by, Dayanand Saraswati. Clear. Now, this clearly means that India at this point of a time was looking for an identity, which is a Aryan identity, the racial identity. And this has all been constructed by the Romantics. And we all been taken up by that ideas. In fact, if you look at there's a follower of Arya Samaj whose name was Bhai Parmanand. Bhai Parmanand was very much follower of Arya Samaj. And when Ambedkar was delivering a lecture on annihilation of caste, which was a very popular lecture, this was basically invited by the Bhai Parmanand. He was from Arya Samaj. And Jat Pat Todak Mandal was made by him in 1922. But when Ambedkar about to deliver his lecture, most of the Hindus did not find it appropriate because they came to know that Ambedkar is going to do a blasphemous, going to do a blasphemy against the Hindus, or against the Hindu religion. So his lecture was cancelled basically. Later on it was published as a text basically. Similarly, if you look at this notion of Aryan race was also become very popular with the Indian nationalist. Ranade clearly pointed out that we can live up to the pure Aryan culture and race under the protection of Pax Britannica, which basically means that he says that Britishers are Aryans, so we can completely live with the Britishers as a form of Aryans. Ranade. Similarly, if you look at Tilak also pointed out we are looking for the Aryan nationhood. In fact, he has gone to this extent. If you look his book actually, which is original home of the Aryas. In fact, he has gone to say that the original home of the Aryas is in the Arctic Ocean, and from that Arctic Ocean, the Aryans has been followed, and then they settle in the India. And while doing that kind of a thing, they have developed all the cultures and civilization through the journey from Arctic Ocean to the India. That's how the Europe has become more and more Aryanized. If you look at the works of Vivekananda has clearly pointed out that the Aryans are beautiful, they are handsome, they are kind, they are generous, they have a straight nose, they have a blue eyes, and their skin drops like a milk. In fact, he has said that the rest of the people who are not Aryans, they are barbarians because they eat carrions and they don't know how to wear clothes. In fact, for him, caste is the greatest social institution. Clear. So we have clearly seen that race is actually becomes a very strong category in India at this point of a time, where most of Indian thinkers were looking for race as a precursor of their emancipation. Clear. Now, at this point of a time, we move next stage. The next stage comes when India was looking for its independence. And at that point of a time, the biggest debate was started is that which is worse, the slavery is worse or untouchability is worse, And if you look at if you read a little bit of political history, one can see this was started around 1927. And 1927, there was one lady, she published a book, Mother India, and then her name was Catherine Mayo. Many people, this is a very, very a very important event in Indian political history, but it was not being highlighted much actually. Now, when Catherine Moore wrote about in his book Mother India, she was basically talking about and making the arguments of internal colonialism in India. That what is the status of lower caste people in India and what is the status of women in India, and therefore India is fit for independence or not. What is the state, how the Indian nationalists are going to treat their own people. This was an argument which was made. One can say, Catherine Mayo publication came at a point of time which was a very critical time. India might not look for people who can write against India at this point of a time. But more importantly, what happened actually, in order to counter the Catherine Mayo, most of the Indian people, the prominent ones, Tagore, Lala Lajpat Rai, Gandhi, they all basically come and try to defend the caste. And that is something very, very complicated. In fact, Tagore has said that caste is a harmonious institution. It is a frictionless institution. It has not created any fictions. And therefore, he says that if you wanted to look at the Americans or the Europeans, actually, they have a race. And they always use the violent methods against their own people, like Red Indians and Negroes. So we have not used those methods against our own lower caste people because the caste system was there, actually. In fact, he has said that caste system is basically an assimilation of aboriginal races, where every aboriginal races has their own pedigree in the system. Lower caste has their own race, so they are not going to have intermingling with the upper caste. Upper caste has their own race, so they are not intermingling with other set of caste as well. So caste system is acting as a form of, one can say, a sort of a multiculturalism. It's a multicultural kind of a category which basically make the segregation possible without assimilation of everyone. In fact, he said that caste system is outcome of toleration among the races. Yeah. Another important person in order to counter the Catherine Mayo was Dilip Sound. Many people does not know about his name actually. Dilip Sound, S-A-U-N-D. He was the first US congressman of Indian origin. First US congressman of Indian origin from 1957 to 1963. He has gone to further extent. And he says that caste is a civilizational categories. He says that Aryans are the right people because they have rightly distanced themselves from the aboriginal people and lower caste people. Because these lower caste people and aboriginal people don't know how to live. They are not civilized. In fact, he has said the present stage of development of caste is recognized across the world. Caste is one of the very good institution which is accepted by most of the civilized world as well. Gandhi to an extent also subscribed to the same view. When the Americans have asked this question to Gandhi about it, what is the status of the lower caste and Shudras and untouchables in India, he says that no, there is no problem because India is a non-violent country. And therefore, because of this non-violence, we don't see the lynching of untouchables take place in India, comparing to the Negroes in America. Also, he said that there is no legal sanctions against untouchability in India, but there are legal sanctions in America over the Negroes actually. So when we look at the race is at this point of a time is being questioned and criticized, and the caste is defended by the Indian intellectuals at this point of a time, which clearly says that caste has always been a method. It's always been a category which has always been available for political considerations in order to show the West that, look, your race is bad, our caste is good. But at the same point of a time, not giving up the Aryan identity, not giving up their own Aryan pride of the race. Yeah. Many people, one can say if this is the kind of a tendencies which is there in the Indian political thought and thinkers actually, we can say this is what we call as alternative modernity. The alternative modernity where at the same point of a time, we wanted to defend the caste because it belonged to us. At the same point of a time, we wanted to criticize the race because it does not belong to us. But at the same point of a time, we also want to defend the Aryan identity, which is again a racial identity, an alternative modernity, which Ambedkar has criticized a long time back and says that it symbolizes as a schizophrenic consciousness. And interestingly, he gave the example of a train. So whenever the Indians wanted to enjoy the advancement of modern civilizations. So when they travel in a train, which is an advancement of modern civilization, they go in a train. But when you're going in a train, actually, definitely there will be a touch will take place with the other people. because it's a closed space. But he says that you travel, you use the modern times, you use the idea, you use all the prospects of the modern civilization as a train. But later on, when you go back to the home, you do your own shuddhi by throwing the Ganga Jal on you, so you become pure. This eventually means for Ambedkar is that this is a symbolism of an alternative modernity, which India has basically acquired. It's a form of a schizophrenic consciousness. Clear. Now the question arises: what happened to the Ambedkar in the Afro-American thought? Now Ambedkar is always remain as a marginal figure even in Afro-American thought. Clear. And why? The reason is again because the caste was defended against the white race in political history. Clear. And therefore, there are two important figures I wanted to point it out. One is Lala Lajpat Rai, and second is Gandhi. Now, Lala Lajpat Rai, where in around 1914 to 1919, he was in America. He was in exile, And when he was in exile, actually, he has a lot of acquaintances with Afro-American leaders, including the prominent one like Du Bois, D-U-B-O-I-S. He is considered to be one of the most important person in the Afro-American history, specifically because he's an intellectual. He's a person who's responsible for many advancement in the African people. The second was Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington is known for his involvement in establishing the Tuskegee University in America. And Tuskegee University in America is known for, it is also known as a Negro Academy, where Negro Academy, they try to build up cultures, art, literature of all the Negroes people. So it is specifically restricted to the Negro people so that they can develop their own emancipation by developing this academy. Similarly, the notion of talented 10th, which has also been very popular in Tuskegee University, that you need to find the 10 important people in the Afro-American world which can look forward to the emancipation of Afro-Americans. Clear. Now at this point of a time, Lala Lajpat Rai has been acquaintances or talking to most of the Afro-American people. And why he was talking? Because he wanted to build up a solidarity with the Afro-Americans against the Britishers. Clear. So the category which he used at this point of a time is anti-colonialism. And the category is called colony. That colony, we are colonized, colony is there actually, and therefore we need to get emancipated. And therefore he says that you are also a colonized people, because the white race has basically colonized you. Yeah? And therefore we have the common enemy, which is basically the race or the white race, clearly. In fact, he has gone to this extent. So therefore one can clearly say the idea of caste, the caste need to be pitched against the race, because what is problematic for Indians actually, or for Dalits actually, and for Ambedkar is the problem of caste. But Lala Lajpat Rai did not highlight the problem of caste in America. At the same point of a time, so the caste and race solidarity जो होना चाहिए था कि नीग्रोस के लिए प्रॉब्लम रेस है और दलित्स के लिए प्रॉब्लम कास्ट है, और इसलिए दोनों को सॉलिडारिटी करना चाहिए आपस में, वो सॉलिडारिटी हो नहीं पाई. Clear. And therefore, in fact, Lala Lajpat has gone to this extent. He said that he says like Negroes, untouchables, they themselves are Indians. So Indians themselves has become the untouchables for him. Why? Because they all are the victims of white race. Clear. Now at this point, and therefore, if you look at his work specifically, his work is like, the prominent work is done in 1916, mein, United States of America. Hindu impression of America, which was written in 1916. He basically says that Negro is the pariah of the US. That Negro is the pariah of the US. That means Negro is the lower caste of the US or untouchable of the US. In 1928 works, he says that Negro is worse than untouchable. That means slavery is worse than untouchability. Why he's saying that slavery is worse than untouchability? The question is that, therefore, in Lala Lajpat Rai views, the untouchability is a better institution in comparison to the slavery. If you look at in the works of and this is important simply because Lala Lajpat Rai does not want to give up, and he never shown into the Afro-American people that in India we all believe in the racial identity, because Lala Lajpat Rai was a strong supporter of the Arya Samaj. He believed in the Aryan race identity. And race is the problem for the Afro-Americans. So once the Afro-Americans known about it, our Lala Lajpat Rai is also a racial, he believed in the racial identity, the solidarity might not have built up. But that fact was not highlighted at that point of the time. Even if you look at like the idea of this Aryan race was also utilized by the Indians when they moved to the America. So most of the Indians, when they moved to the America, actually, they always been clubbed as the Negroes, non-white, not Caucasian. They are not Caucasian race. And most of the Indians, when they go to the America, they wanted to claim that they are the white race people. They are Caucasians. Don't club us with the Negroes, actually. So this idea of like, two nation theory, I will not use the word two nation theory, that will be very harsh, but this idea of the two race theory was very much popular among the Indians at this point of a time. Nobody was worried about how to deal with the question of caste, but everybody was taking a pride in the racial identity. In fact, Du Bois, who is also a very important figure, also subscribed to the same idea. Because if you look at the works of the Du Bois specifically, Du Bois was also very much impacted by the German Romanticism, very much impacted by the German Romanticism. Because when he was there in Germany, actually, he was talking about cultures, he was talking about civilization. In fact, he was looking for the idea of Negro race, that there should be a time come when there will be a Negro race going to come into the picture. Is the idea of Negro Academy, Talented 10, they all were taking place at this point of a time in Germany. So the German Romanticism also impacted the Afro-American thought for a long period of time. But Ambedkar, to an extent, is very much opposed to these kind of ideas. In fact, this is the reason why Gandhi became more popular in Afro-America rather than the Ambedkar. The reason is that because Gandhi's ideas of spiritualism, his ideas of Christianity is very much associated with the Afro-Americans, But even the Afro-Americans did not know that Gandhi was also at one point of a time was a believer in the Aryan race. So if you look at his original works, actually, because if you look at when he was in South Africa, actually, he was clubbed, he was written an application to the committee in the Durban that don't club us in the Negroes because we are not Kafirs. We are the believer, we are the Aryan race as you are actually. And if you look at his works, actually, and his application is clearly pointed out that we belong to the Indo-Germanic race, So this idea of race is still there very much in the Gandhi as well. Clear. And therefore, one can clearly say that this was not going to be subside very much with the Ambedkar's ideas, because Ambedkar being as a scientific figure, rationalistic figure, more cosmopolitan in his outlook, rejecter of the Aryan race theory as well. In fact, if you look his work, Ambedkar has written the book, Who Were Shudras and Untouchables. And in fact, it is a very meticulous work. In fact, in that work, he clearly pointed out the Shudras were originally belonged to the Aryan race, but he rejected that theory later on. He says that despite of that fact, I'm not getting into it because there are many interpolations, there are many problems, there are many things, and we cannot certainly say that the Shudras belong to the Aryan race, because if you look at like Gayatri mantras, which does not mention any of the Shudras word over there. Also, if you look at the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda, in which the Purusha Shukta theory is given, where the division of human beings based on the four sets of people, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, many people have identified. Even Max Muller has identified that this is a later addition. It was not originally there in the Rig Veda, because if you look at the metric, the style, the lyrical, because Rig Veda is more in a lyrical form. It's a shloka, it's a mantra, so it has to be in a lyrical form. But when 10th mandala comes, actually, it is not in a lyrical form. It is in a very analytical form, like a dialogue, like a conversation. You are asking a question, somebody is answering you, which definitely does not matches with the originality of the Rig Veda. Clear. But Ambedkar does not believe in this idea of racial identity as well, like Phule, Periyar, and other people believes, like Dayanand Saraswati believes in other people. He rejected this idea of racial theory, because primarily he was a scientific figure. And that is the reason why he was always remained as a marginal figure, not accepted as because being a scientific and is considered to be a more radical figure. How can you just reject the whole civilization in just one go? Nobody is going to accept that very easily. Yeah. In fact, when Ambedkar also written a rejoinder against the Lala Lajpat Rai. He says that this is a wrong comparison. The caste, the slavery is still better than untouchability. And we should not compare that kind of a thing, because he gave an argument that if you look at the slaves are considered not as a person, because he says that, and therefore he makes the distinction between a human and a person. So human is somebody who is not being sanctioned by the law. जिस पे law के कोई भी पाबंदियां नहीं लगी हैं. He is not considered as a legal personality, or she is not considered as a legal personality, but still a human. Whereas a person is somebody who has a legal personality. And therefore, Ambedkar says that slave is not a person, but a human. Clear? And slave is a human because slave is basically, and therefore the slave were considered as a fellow workers. They are not as a legal person, but they are considered as a fellow workers in the society. And if you look at, like, he given the very good description about it, the Roman slaves. The Roman slaves are trained in literature, they were trained in art, they were trained in music, athletics, and many things. You know, one can say clearly they are the part of the public sphere. Public space ka part the wo log. Libraries, the copies, many people were there, but they're still a slave. You know, and therefore, if you look at clearly, that they're artisans and craftsmen. You know. And therefore, they have been respected and accepted by the American society simply because they are the producer of the American economy. Society has not rejected them. Maybe they does not have a legal status, but it's better because the society recognized there that they are human. But Ambedkar says that untouchables are treated not as a human, but they were treated as a person. That basically means that they are a legal personality because they are governed by the laws which are the caste laws, the dharmic laws, you know. And therefore, untouchability is, if it is governed by the laws, actually, then untouchability is basically based on a compulsion because it is sanctioned by the law. Clear? And because of that reason, Ambedkar argued that the very growth of the untouchable is not being taken place because their personality and growth was stunted because of the laws, the legality specifically. In fact, Ambedkar argued that untouchables, if untouchable died actually, then it is good for the society because there's a old saying that if untouchable is dead, then the fear of the pollution is vanished. So Ambedkar clearly pointed out that the untouchability is a worst form of punishment which can give into the human beings, which is not like, you know, worse than which is like, you know, in comparison to the slavery is a better institution, which completely goes against the writings of Lala Lajpat Rai in that sense. Now, and therefore, in that sense, and this is the idea which Ambedkar is coming up. Now, if you look at clearly, like Ambedkar's marginalization, Ambedkar also written a letter. He written a letter to Du Bois at one point of a time. And he written in his letter, he's written is that I am very much aware of the Afro-Americans and the problem of the race they are facing with. The similar problem we are also facing in India as Dalits. We are facing the problem of caste, and therefore I wanted some kind of a solidarity from you. Du Bois also responded to it, and he says that, oh, I know you, and this is the I can definitely look for the solidarity and that kind of a thing. After that, no communication taken place. This was an important moment where the Afro-Americans and Dalit solidarity can be built up, but it has not taken place. And therefore, if you look at, like, you know, this solidarity has not been taken place. One of the reasons is that because the thing is that Du Bois himself was looking for the African past. He was very much impacted by the German Romanticism. He's looking for the Negro race. You know, he is a person who essentialized the race as well. You know, he's looking for the Black power. He's looking for the African golden age. The similar kind of a disposition which we have seen the other set of thinkers in India were doing. They were looking for the Aryan golden age, actually. Now the question arises, and this is one of the reasons which I wanted to say and conclude by saying is that Ambedkar's marginality is there in Afro-American thought. The prime reason is that because he was a scientific figure, his idea of rationality is very much popular. He's a rejecter of the very notion of Aryan race, and more important, he's actually taken up the side of Buddhism, because he says that, like, you know, the route for emancipation of Dalits does not lies with getting into the trap of the Aryan race or non-Aryan race or original inhabitant and all those kind of an argument, which was very much popular with the Phule and the Periyar as well. He clearly said that Buddhism is a route. Why? Because Buddhism is nothing if not rationalism, according to him. It is the rational ideas. So for him, the ideas, he's basically looking for all ideas which are modern, which to an extent are also called as the secular ideas, He believed in the idea of constitutionalism. And in that sense, he's much more closer to the Nehru, you know. And we have seen, like in today's times, if you look at clearly, Nehru is living in the margins, you know. The reason is that because Nehru is again a very, very radical figure. So anyone who's a radical figure in the Indian society is not being taken up very in a good sense specifically. Whereas the people like other set of people has been taken up in a better sense, in a more popular sense, because they talk about spirituality, it talks about bringing back the golden past and all those kind of things. Clear. Another important arises why all this problem will eventually come into the picture, as I already mentioned, because the theories, the philosophies, and the perspectives have very much shifted towards a turn which is called a cultural turn. You know, the cultural turn basically means that we need to look for, and this cultural turn also need to be understood in terms of identity constructions, that we all are looking for, that how to construct our identities in a very primordial sense, that this is my originality, so I'm like that kind of a thing is happening. It is also like making us to go back to the golden age, some kind of a golden age. Revivalism in politics is happening. And because of these reasons, the culture has actually becomes a very important category through which one can figure out that who they are and who they are not actually. If they belong to our culture, they are us. If they are not belong to our culture, they are not actually. This politics is now becoming a very, very central phenomena. And this is not just simply because of politics, but there's a shift in the ideas as well, you know. And one can say clearly there's a decline, which we can see in secular identities taking place. There's a decline in modernity as well, you know. And therefore, the problem is that the modernity, plurality, they are in a deeply challengeable situations. Clear? And figures like Ambedkar should always be remembered for these kind of ideas. Yeah. So I will stop here. If we have any, I'm looking forward for the questions, because I dealt specifically with the lot of historical facts. I did not cover many things. There's a lot of many things which need to be covered, because this is a lot of historical facts are involved in it. But at the same point of time, don't misinterpret it that I'm taking it's a completely a very, very intellectual exercise. You know, when we do study history, most of the problem happens that we don't history much, you know. And when we do history, when we do read history, actually, we find that these are the small facts makes a lot of sense. That we can understand that Tagore is an internationalist, but we don't know that Tagore is basically a defender of the caste system as well. And when at that point of a time, when other people are pointing him some questions, you know, we don't know that Gandhi was very much influenced by German Romanticism. In fact, he's quoted the book of W.W. Hunter, in which he says that, you know, we are the part of the Indo-Germanic stock. Lala Lajpat Rai, very important figure, prominent Indian nationalist, but we don't know that what kind of a diplomacy he played with the Afro-Americans in comparison to the Indians. So Vivekanand, very prominent figure, but we don't know that he's also like, say, the caste is the best institution. The Aryans are the better people actually. So this idea of Aryan race is being cultivated, structured by the Romanticism. So what to do with Romanticism? So it actually becomes a little bit of problematic for us to just say, like, you know, Britishers came, they colonize us, they impose their categories on us, and look, we have become like this. But in Indian scenario, we might have rejected the British Anglicans, but we have not rejected the German Romantics and the British Romantics, because they have created the pride idea in all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pawaiya, for this very rich lecture. I would like to congratulate you for bringing to us some of the pertinent questions that have become so relevant. Our relevant questions are the question that needs to be probed, the question that needs to be part of our everydayness. So before I open the floor for question and answers, I've requested the audience, if you have a question, you could raise your hand if you want to ask your question in person, or you could write your question in the chat box, and I would help communicating that to Dr. Pawaiya. There's some quick points, some talking points that I would like to share that would be our taking points, the points that we would like to take back with us and our students. The very important question about marginality of Ambedkar in the larger public domain, in the larger public discourse. And you very brilliantly positioned the reasons as to why Ambedkar was not invoked in the sense that Gandhi went on to be invoked in the larger Afro-Asian, African-American debates on race and emancipation. The second very important concern was the idea of the historical evolution of the race theory in the larger Indian political thinking. And very brilliantly, you sort of bring as to how it emerges and how it is legitimized and how within the larger intellectual history of India, modern India, it came to be adopted as one of their own thinkings. And also bringing in, Lala Lajpat Rai so significantly in this larger debate, because he's missed out when we talk about race, but he's such a significant interlocutor in terms of legitimizing a lot of concerns. Vagesh, I have one query. It's not a question, just a query. Is there any possibility for us to compare Siddharth College with the Negro Academy? I mean, I'm hearing about the Negro Academy for the first time, and I felt that it kind of resonated with some of the ideas with which Siddharth College was established. And also, like, I want to bring your attention, because I've been working with women thinkers for some time, Vagesh, and how race also becomes a very important point within the diversity of Indian women thinking. There were some women thinkers like Annie Besant, people like Sister Nivedita, who went on to glorify the Aryan motherhood, the Aryan mother, the Aryan woman, and juxtapose it with some of the deviant kind of writings of Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, which challenged this race conception, asking that, why it is important for women to have bodily autonomy and reproductive rights, because women are not just producers of race or breeders of race. And this is one understanding that the nationalist movement, and particularly Gandhi, brings in centrally when he talks about the role of women in the larger nationhood and the role of women, not just in the national movement, but how would you invoke the women of modern India as mothers, as Aryan mothers who would be breeding, who would be reproducing the future generation, but also inculcating values of nationalism, tapasya, tyag, sacrifice, and things like that. So the idea of the race and womanhood was also very brilliantly sort of debated within the women collectives and ideas. And the last point about Pandita Ramabai and her US encounter, because she was one of the very few Indian women who actually came back and wrote about her experiences about USA. I have to go back and see how does she look at the question of race, but she looks at America as a very emancipated space, as a space that would actually encourage Indian women to think about, equality and liberation. So these are some of my queries, Vagesh, and you could answer these right now, or if you want, we could take some questions if you're interested. Thank you.
Just a quick thing, like you rightly pointed out, like, there can be a possibility of comparison between a Siddhartha College and a Negro Academy, because ultimately, at this point of a time, like, for example, we know that Gandhi's ashram is known for, like, most of his Gandhi's work, which is there actually. Shanti Niketan is known for most of the works of Tagore is available there actually. So at this point of a time, we need some kind of a society or an academy where the most of the works, because many volumes has been written, many volumes, many important facts written about Ambedkar, about small things, like, even I'm not getting to, like, when he talks about it, the origin of untouchability, if you read it about it, he says that untouchable has a different origin. No, it's not like the racial question. The untouchables are basically the broken man. It belonged to one tribe, which is basically annihilated by another tribe, and therefore they don't know where to go, because the tribal culture, and one tribe cannot welcome the other tribe. So ultimately they have to live at the outside. And that's why he compares that's the word, the untouchable word used kara jata, antayaja. The antayaja basically means the people live outside, So why they were untouchable and outside? Simply because nobody is going to welcome them, because ultimately they have been a tribe which has been lost in the war. So how they're going to live? So they ultimately try to live as outsiders. And at the same point of a time, because of being there as a martial classes, because the tribe and they're fighting classes, but they lost there from their own tribes. So they were also became the guards who were guarding the village. And the villagers basically going to give them little bit of food, which is available to them. So that's how they survived, And that's how they started eating the cows as well, and other sort of animals. And that's how the purity and pollution concept has started, and that's why they became the untouchables. So there are many things which Ambedkar has pointed out, but is not coming up. So it's good it is at least like compiled in some sense. There has to be more on studies which to be done over here, But the point is that, unlike in America, like Du Bois is somebody who is a socialist. He was a romantic as well. He's like, the many personalities which has been involved in Du Bois actually. We have not find that in Indian Dalit discourse, this kind of a rich tradition of like engagement with ideas has emerged. We have seen like Dalit and untouchable is mostly remain as a political categories. In fact, Ambedkar was reduced as a political figure. Maybe we know Ambedkar is just like, a father of the Indian Constitution, but the discourse at the level of ideas, it has not been emancipated. And that can only possible when the more and more this kind of a work need to be done over here. Yeah. Definitely your sister Nivedita, they all belong to a theosophical society, which is very much like, embedded with the ideas of Vivekananda and other sort of people, So it definitely, there is definitely similarity will be there actually in terms of like their idea of their race and Aryan identity will definitely going to be there. Yeah. One point I wanted to make is like, if you look at Ambedkar's personality specifically, he's a cosmopolitan figure, the figure who's a diverse figure, the figure with the plurality, And if you look at like Indian political thinkers, most of them actually, they've never been like, one cannot say that ye authentic hai, ye pure hai, ye impure hai, ye Western hai, ye Indian hai, ye hai. Nahi ho sakta hai. Gandhi was very much like, impressed by the gospel of the Christ. He's looking for the kingdom of God from the Christ lenses. Will he called as a foreigner? We don't know. Ambedkar, very much influenced by the ideas of John Dewey. Will he called as a foreigner? No. Nehru, Fabian socialism. Will he called as a foreigner? No. Golwalkar, Savarkar, very much impressed by the German nationalism. The very idea of nationalism which we invoke actually is a Western product. The whole Europe was basically, they use the same kind of a language which used by Savarkar and Golwalkar. They themselves are the product ideas of the Western product actually. So we don't know actually who's a real, who's an original, and this debate about it, ye is such asli hai or ye nakli hai. This I don't think so. That is very much sustainable in Indian context, because most of them figure are diverse. And if you look at like Indian Constitution, which is basically a reflection of our cosmopolitanism, the best Constitution which I think like is written, best Constitution which incorporates like all kind of a plural diversity which could be mentioned in the Constitution has been mentioned actually. Just because the people who made them, they themselves have a very cosmopolitan view. Ambedkar, Nehru, many people, Patel, definitely. Patel was completely against the idea of private property. Because he says that like, and if you look at like Indian legal history also, like the very concept of due process was rejected by the Indian constitutionalists. Because he says that if you're going to involve the concept of due process in Indian constitution, then every point of a time, any Jamidar will come to the court and says that it's a violation of my property rights. So that's why we use the procedure established by law. And therefore Patel, Nehru, Ambedkar, they all thought like, agar aisa hoga, to land reform to ho hi nahi payenge. So they rejected this idea. So it's like, and that's why they adopted what we call Japanese Constitution, Article 31 nikala unhone, because that is much more better idea. So they all done a very meticulous job because they have this personality of being a diverse and plural figures. This one question is there, like, about Tilak.
Rajan, would you want to ask the question, or do you want sir to read it and respond to it? Okay, we also have a hand raised, Nilanjan. Vagesh, would you just read the question? You want me to? Okay,
I'm reading it.
Okay.
The question is that Tilak's architect Humadavid asked, do you think he was articulating the origin of Aryan theory in order to distinguish the Aborigines from the rest of Aryan race, or it was an attempt to keep oneself on an equal pedestal with the British and claiming equality between the subject and colonizing the larger debate of Swaraj? Because Tilak's attempt to scientifically place this theory based on astronomy and calendar was not accepted by many contemporary historians. Yeah, that is true actually, because one can say clearly, like, when he's talking about Arctic home, the Vedas, the Aryans have the home at the Arctic region actually, and using all kind of astronomical method actually, which has not been accepted by many people, But he was doing primarily because he wanted to highlight this point that the Hindus are the Aryans. and Hindus are basically, it is a form of a civilization which is basically traveling from the Arctic, and it is civilized most of the Europe, civilized karte, finally they came to the India. And when they come to the India, which eventually means like, they also wanted to do a little bit of like, civilizational tasks to the Aborigines also here, So Aryan race is considered as a prominent race in order to emancipate the Aborigines from their, ways of life. Clear. One can say that could be an argument. Yes, it could be an argument that Aryan race is used as a form of, emancipatory things. Like whole Europe was become Aryanized to an extent because of this traveling of the Aryans from the Arctic Ocean, and definitely like, he wanted to claim the equal status. The whole idea of romanticism was basically the same thing. The Britishers wanted to say that, look, you are Aryan, we are Aryan. So what is the fight? Why we are fighting against each other? You belong to the same culture, you speak the same language as the Indo-Europeans speak. Sanskrit is a cognate of the Indo-European languages. So what are the differences actually? Definitely. So it's more like that actually.
Nilanjan, you could please ask your question.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Sir, I think what I felt a little bit is that Tagore's defense of the caste is a little bit more complicated because, yes, it's true that he has at times defended caste, and it seems that he had a faith in the caste system as well. But if we look at Tagore's idea of history, and it seems that he only defended caste when, for him, like when the society seems to collapse. But again, when the caste is like there are two concepts here. One is Atma Sankochan and one is Atma Samprasaran. So when the Sankochan is too much, then it will again go for Samprasaran. So that was Tagore's idea of history. So again, it will move away from caste. It will again come back to caste when again the Samprasaran will be too much. So this is one of, I think, Tagore's. It was in Tagore's idea of history. A second point is like his novels like Gora. His novels like Gora. In Gora, it seems like that he is actually moving away from caste. Third, in the case of the Brahmo Samaj, he was a votary of someone. He wanted people from the non-Brahmin castes, though yes, not the lower caste as such, but maybe the Kayasthas and others, to actually take the what they call as the Bedi or the pulpit. So, but again, he was ostracized for that. And if you go through the Tattva Bodhini Patrika, the mouthpiece of the Brahmo Samaj, it is very much evident that he actually wanted the people from outside the Brahmin caste to take the pulpit. But many of the Brahmin members of the Brahmo Samaj, they criticized him like nothing. So I think it's a little bit more complicated in Tagore's defense of the caste, maybe based on certain time, certain context. And anyway, Shushavan Sarkar had sort of categorized Tagore's intellectual frame into two. One is some which is dominated by Orientalism or Paschatya-Abhiman, and the other is like Paschimi Drishti, or what we call as Westernism. So maybe at times Tagore seems to be defending caste, but at other certain times, based on the context, based on his own changing mindset, he seems to be going away from that. So I think it's a little bit more complicated because Tagore had a long time frame, around he lived for around 80 years, wrote for around 60 years, 57, 60 years. So I think it's a little bit more complicated. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, there's definitely a possibility, But I specifically quoted the Tagore and specifically used those words specifically from his work like Nationalism in India, which is a complete work which is available online as well. And definitely the time period in which Tagore come on the board and try to defend the caste, because this was the time period of Indian nationalism as well. Indians were looking to get emancipated from the Britishers, and definitely they were looking. They wanted like some kind of, at this point of time, they don't want it that their tag, they can be called as like, who are the enslavers of the internal people as well, So, but at the same point of time, we cannot deny this fact actually. It's like he's clearly pointing out that, he clearly says like, the caste is always act as a catalyst. The catalyst, because the caste, maybe he has very different views about the untouchability. He's completely against the idea of untouchability. He's saying that untouchability should go away. This is not a good institution. Like Gandhi is also not in favor of untouchability. But when it comes to the caste, he's clearly pointing out that the caste is basically a form of an institution which is a frictionless institution. It has not created a fiction. And therefore, he says that when we look at the history of the Australians and Americans, actually, what the Australians and Americans did to the Aborigines, actually, they tried to wipe them out, actually. But the same does not take in place with the Indian lower caste people or Aborigine people, because we come with a caste system in which we maintain the differences as well and similarity as well. You know, we keep them. It is an assimilation. You assemble lower caste people within the fold, but at the same point of a time, you do not annihilate them, neither like, rejected them. So ideally, अगर देखा जाए, गांधी के लिए भी caste system अच्छा ही था, because गांधी के लिए the caste system became corrupt when the Brahmins stopped doing their own job. So it's a form of a dharma. So if each of the caste basically goes against their own dharma, then definitely the caste system, the Varna system is going to collapse specifically. One can say, like, when Tagore talk about this point, he may be using it as a diplomatic argument against the Catherine Mayo specifically, and in order to give a counter to the Americans, basically. One can say that point. However, there's always a possibility of interpretations. That is true, actually. And you can say, like, maybe in the later writings, maybe in the previous writings, he's changing his views. That is all right. That is all right. There's no problem about it.
Thank you, Vagesh. There's a question in the chat box by Kislev.
Most of the Indian leaders at the time of national movement were trying to hide the irrationality of Indian caste system to the imposition of race theory with the caste system and Ambedkar's authority. But do you think the Ambedkar made a mistake by comparing the plight of Sudras of India with slavery of Afro-Americans and then reaching the conclusion the condition of slaves were better than the Shudras in India? Could this be reason Gandhi is more popular among the Afro-Americans community than Ambedkar? No, that's not the case, actually, because when Ambedkar made this comparison, he was written a comparison as a rejoinder to the Lala Lajpat Rai. In his volume 5th, I think, where he says, like, why the position of the slaves still better a position than untouchables. One can see clearly, like, most of in Roman times, since Roman times till modern times, we have seen that slaves are actually become the great leaders. They have actually become the great craftsmen. They have been recognized, specifically in the society. They have become the great athletes as well. The reason is that because the slavery was not a legal sanction. It was not legally sanctioned to them. That लिखा हुआ है कि ये slave है, आप slave के लिए ये अधिकार है, ये अधिकार नहीं है. अधिकार, they were not considered as a legal personality. So they to an extent a more free person. जैसे कि Aristotle की definition है slavery की. Aristotle says that slave is like a tool, the tool which need to be utilized properly. इसलिए अम्बेडकर ने भी कहा है कि slave is like an asset to the society. And if it's an asset to the society, you have to take care of your asset. And that's why the slave is given a proper work, proper assets. It's like an asset. You have to take care of it. अगर आप अपने slave की care नहीं करेंगे तो आपको ही नुकसान होगा. Because it's a material to you. It's a material object to you. But when we look at an untouchability specifically, it's a legal sanction. You don't care about how the untouchable live, does not live, because you don't care about it. It's a source of pollution for you. And more importantly, that they are also treated as a legal personality. उन पे law के sanctions भी लगे हुए हैं. So in that sense, one can clearly say that when Ambedkar made a comparison, he made a comparison in order to counter the Lala Lajpat Rai's argument, because Lala Lajpat Rai was completely gone with a diplomatic mission with Afro-Americans. No Afro-American does not know that Lala Lajpat Rai was an Arya Samajist. He's a believer in the Aryan race, and he's completely believe in the notion of Shuddhi of the lower caste people, Muslim people, and the Christian in the India. Nobody knows about it, because the problem for Afro-American is the race, and Lala Lajpat Rai was a racist. But that was not highlighted at that point of a time. Yeah. Gandhi became more popular because of his language. That's the reason why Gandhi became more popular, because he can speak the language of the heart with the people. He's much more spiritual, he's much more religious. And if you wanted to, talk with the people with the language which he spoke, everybody can connect with him. Ambedkar's language, rationalistic, analytical, scientific, many people won't agree. It's a radical language. Who will agree with Ambedkar while, questioning the society or questioning the religion or questioning the spirituality? Many people will not agree. So Gandhi became more closer to the Afro-Americans in that sense in comparison to the Ambedkar, definitely. Should the Aryan civilization theory, the Europeans' white man's burden theory be considered the same? That we need to think about it, because so far it seems like, we have not given up the Aryan civilization theory, which is again a part of the British and German romantic project. We accepted that thing and we rejected the Europeans' white man's burden theory, which basically the Anglican version, ki Angrezi kharab cheez hai, Angrezi ko hata dena, but not like, we have not rejected the prideful part, which is like, romantics did to the Indians, and more importantly, that all this has been done with a collaboration. It's a collaborative project. It's not a project it's imposed above. And their writings were even William Jones, their writing done by the Rosanna Rocher and other people who clearly pointed out that even when William Jones and other Indologists, romantic, when they wanted to consult with the Indian local people, the scholars, they always were hesitant because they're never sure about it, whether these people are giving the biased views or non-biased views, because ultimately they know the language. So most of the work they've written under the aegis of the local people.
Thank you, Vagesh. Do we have any more questions? We are actually closing in time also. Okay. Vagesh, which books would you recommend to our students as a good start to understand Ambedkar's position on race or on caste? He's a very significant thinker in our syllabus. But what are the texts that you think would be useful for our audience, for us to engage with Ambedkar's position more intensely?
If I see it like, one of the important work is the work of Raymond Schwab, Raymond Schwab, Raymond Schwab, Oriental Renaissance. This is considered to be a more important work because that's where we can clearly see that when we look at debates in Orientalism, it cannot be easily clubbed into Edward Said kind of Orientalism and reduced to imperialism. Because Raymond Schwab works clearly shows that in India, there was two kinds of Orientalism which was working. That is one of very important work and discovered a lot of things. The other work which I suggest Ambedkar works is definitely the Who Were Shudras and Untouchables. Very good work. Included meticulously, he included most of the scriptures, get into details. In fact, like, nobody has consulted the Persian text in order to find the difference between the Aryans and the Dasas. Ambedkar has looked at the Persian text, which is the Jayant Avesta. Avesta is considered to be the first Oriental text which was translated. It's the oldest text actually, more older in comparison to the Vedas, one can clearly say. It's the oldest text actually, Oriental text. And Ambedkar has used that text in order to find that in India there are two types of races were there, Indo-Iranian and Indo-Aryans. Indo-Iranians are the non-Vedic people. They do not follow the religion of the Vedics. That's why they've been described as, the people who are militias or barbarians to an extent. Whereas the Vedic people, they are the sacrificers. They believe in yagnas and they speak the Sanskrit. So, so I think like Who Were the Shudras and Untouchables, that is one of the very good work. And also like Raymond Schwab to understand the Oriental Renaissance specifically, one can start with that thing. And apart from that, many works, or if anybody can read original works of Ambedkar, that has always been good actually. Because most of the time it happens, Ambedkar is just reduced to the question of annihilation of caste, this and that, which is I think it's a very reductionist way of looking at Ambedkar specifically.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pawaiya. And now we are at the closure of this very fascinating end to this very fascinating lecture. And I can take this opportunity to call, I call Dr. Pawaiya Vagesh at moments because I want to share with everyone that Vagesh and I, we've been friends and we've taken our academic journey together since JNU days, since our master days, and we share a long history of intellectual friendship. And it is really, really encouraging to see the kind of work which is being done by scholars like Vagesh and others who have been working so hard in positioning Ambedkar centrally is in the larger way in which we do intellectual history of ideas, we do political theory, and what we do as Indian political thought. So on behalf of the department, Vagesh, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for delivering this lecture and inspiring our students and encouraging them to talk more about Ambedkar. And as part of this conversation, we have next week on Friday, same time, we would have Dr. Krishna Swami Dara from Jamia Millia Islamia, who would be delivering the lecture on Dr. Ambedkar as a legal thinker. So thank you so very much.
Thank you,
And,
Priyanka, and thank you, department, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. And Priyanka and me had a long history in JNU, and we used to have good, fair discussions among many things and many jokes and around. And it's good to relive the older time again. Thank you so much, Priyanka.
Thank you. And we would be also inviting, hopefully the online sessions are over soon, and hopefully we would also invite Vagesh in person to talk to our students, and hopefully we would schedule that in early 2024. We are working on the series of moving the lectures towards an offline mode. Okay, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.